We've all seen the Hollywood movies, right? The cinematic quests, the pop culture legends surrounding the Ark of the Covenant. But today, in this explainer, we're going to completely bypass the myths and uncover its actual, historical, and biblical identity. We're going to look at three very distinct names used for this one sacred chest in the ancient texts. And, as you'll see, they reveal a truly brilliant theological story.
Okay, let's clear up some linguistic confusion right off the bat. When you hear the word ark in English, you probably think of two things: this golden box and Noah's massive wooden boat. But in the original Hebrew, those are two completely different words. Noah's vessel is a teva, a large chest-like vessel. But the word used for the covenant ark is aron, which simply means a chest or a box. Yet, conceptually, they share a really beautiful thread. Both are containers intimately associated with carrying God's saving presence through judgment.
Now, to ground us in the physical reality of this object, this wasn't just some abstract mystical idea. It was a tangible, meticulously crafted chest built under Moses' direction. Made of incredibly durable acacia wood and overlaid entirely with pure gold, it featured golden carrying poles and a highly specific lid known as the mercy seat, guarded by golden cherubim. This chest was kept hidden away in the absolute most sacred room of the ancient sanctuary, the most holy place. So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the sacred chest itself, then explore its three names: the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Testimony, and the Ark of God. After that, we'll dive into the concept of mercy above the law, and finally wrap up with the ultimate meeting place.
Let's jump right into part one, Ark of the Covenant, and how it established a relationship.
You know, this is absolutely the most familiar name to us, but there's a tiny grammatical distinction here that literally changes everything. The golden box itself wasn't the covenant. It was the Ark of the Covenant. The actual covenant was God's promises, his relational commitment, and his stipulations for Israel. The box was just the sacred object associated with that relationship. So when the ancient Israelites saw the Ark, it served as this powerful physical reminder communicating one core truth: we are a covenant people. Moving on to part two, Ark of the Testimony, the divine witness chest. This name comes from a Hebrew root word associated with bearing witness or providing evidence, and it completely shifts our focus from relationship to revelation. Take a look at this quote from Exodus. God doesn't say, hey, put the covenant in the ark. He specifically says, put the testimony in the ark. He's talking about the stone tablets. Those tablets weren't just a list of ancient rules, they were a witness. They testified that God had actually spoken and defined what faithfulness looks like. The ark effectively became a divine courtroom object, bearing tangible evidence of God's claim on his people. Next up, part three, the Ark of God, highlighting presence and authority. When we get to the historical narratives in the book of Samuel, the tone shifts dramatically. Just look at this progression side by side. The word covenant drops away. The word testimony drops away. All that's left is the overwhelming presence and authority of God himself. These aren't just interchangeable random labels. They tell a story. God makes a covenant, establishing a relationship. Within that relationship, he gives his testimony. He speaks. And finally, his very presence and authority dwell among his people. It goes from covenant to testimony to God himself. But, this progression introduces some serious narrative tension. Because when the Ark is called the Ark of God, the Israelites aren't just thinking about a fancy document box anymore. They are thinking God is coming among us. So the absolutely crucial question is this: what happens when the living God comes near? Well, it represents an overwhelming holiness that brings both incredible blessing and severe danger. Because of that intense presence, human nature made some catastrophic mistakes. Israel actually started treating the ark like a magical box, a supernatural weapon they could just deploy to force a military victory against the Philistines. But God cannot be manipulated. Israel was utterly defeated, and the ark was captured. The Philistines, though, they quickly learned a lesson too. They placed the captured ark next to the statue of their god Dagon, only to wake up and find Dagon shattered on the floor. Message received, right? God doesn't need humanity to defend him, and he certainly cannot be controlled just because you possess his symbol. And that brings us to one of the most terrifying stories associated with the ark, the story of Uzzah. King David was transporting the ark on a cart, the oxen stumbled, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the sacred chest, and he died. It's a really harsh narrative, for sure, but it hits on a sobering reality. The ark was primarily about God's unmanipulable holiness. It was supposed to be carried respectfully on poles by priests, not just loaded onto a convenient cart like a piece of furniture. Good intentions simply do not make disobedience acceptable. Which leads us to part four, mercy above the law. diving into the spatial theology of the Ark.
So if we're dealing with a holiness that intense, how does humanity even survive it? Just look at how this is physically and theologically layered. Inside the chest, at the very bottom, is the testimony, the law. But covering that law is the mercy seat. And hovering over the mercy seat, right between the cherubim, is God's manifest presence. The message here is unmistakable. God's covenant witness sits entirely beneath the mercy seat, meaning his relationship with his people isn't just based on a set of rules. It is fundamentally mediated through mercy and atonement.
And what exactly was inside this thing? Well, the book of Hebrews tells us it held the stone tablets, a golden pot of manna, and Aaron's rod that miraculously budded. Think about what these three objects represent for a second. The tablets show that God speaks. The manna shows that God provides. And Aaron's budding rod? That shows God gives life from what appears completely dead.
Finally, let's look at part 5, the ultimate meeting place, moving from symbol to reality.
Now, this ancient sanctuary symbolism doesn't just stay stuck in the Old Testament. It transitions perfectly into an astonishing New Testament reality. In the Old Testament, the Ark was the appointed meeting place. God's presence dwelt among his people in a physical sanctuary. But then, the Gospel of John tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That Greek word for dwelt literally means he tabernacled among us. Jesus steps in as the ultimate meeting place between God and humanity. He doesn't just carry God's presence like a wooden box did. He actually reveals God to us.
Just look at how Christ converges literally every single theme of those items inside the Ark. The tablets of the law, Jesus is the Word made flesh. The pot of manna, he's the bread of life. Aaron's priestly rod that grew buds, Jesus is our great high priest, and he is the resurrection and the life. He doesn't abolish the intense holiness or the law of the Ark. Instead, he perfectly brings mercy and truth together in one single person. But here's the crazy part. The Ark's story isn't actually over yet. It reappears at the very end of the biblical narrative. In Revelation chapter 11, the heavenly temple opens, and the Ark of his testament, or covenant, is seen on a cosmic, heavenly level amidst thunder and lightning. This signals that God's holiness hasn't disappeared. It stands as a profound reminder of God's absolute covenant faithfulness, signaling that he is bringing all of human history to account based on that very covenant. Bringing this right down to us today, though, the history of the Ark gives us a pretty massive warning. Just as the ancient Israelites carried the physical Ark of the Covenant while totally forgetting the covenant in their hearts, we can do the exact same thing today. A person can possess religious symbols, you can own a Bible, use all the right theological language, attend church every week, and still completely miss the God to whom all those things point. You can possess the symbol while utterly abandoning the reality. It teaches us that God cannot be reduced to a box we just carry around. He doesn't just give us words, he comes near, and he places his mercy directly above his law. So what you should really take away from this explainer isn't just a bunch of ancient history or cool archaeological facts. The real question is this: does the God to whom the Ark pointed actually have me? Because the ultimate greatest miracle isn't humanity carrying around a sacred object. It's God actually choosing to make humanity his dwelling place. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the realities behind the symbols.